She polished silver for a son who stopped saying thank you. She watered roses for a husband buried 6 years too long. Then one word, extra, made her question everything she ever gave. When betrayal wore a smile and blood turned its back, she rewrote her will with trembling hands and a steel spine. Because sometimes, the most radical act of love is choosing yourself. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I've always taken pride in being composed, raised to stand tall, speak softly, and never let a wrinkle form on my dress or my demeanor. In this town, people know me as a woman of taste, of class. A widow, yes, but one who never let sorrow stain her presentation. The kind of woman who lays out fresh linens for guests who may never come, and still waters roses as if her late husband might walk through the door and admire them once more. This house, our house, rests on a gentle slope at the edge of a New England bay. White shutters and sandstone brick kissed by sea wind. Whitmore House, they call it, built brick by brick with Daniel's hands and my vision. He died 6 years ago. Massive stroke. Quick. I remember kneeling beside him on the kitchen floor, calling his name while the tea kettle screamed behind me. The silence afterward was louder. Lincoln was always Daniel's son in more ways than mine. Tall, broad-shouldered, that same impatience in his blood. But where Daniel used silence as control, Lincoln wields it as a shield. Growing up, he'd skip dinner if I asked too many questions. Roll his eyes at my reminders. Still, I told myself, he's just a boy. Boys will soften with time. He didn't. He married Brielle 3 years ago. A trim little thing with a high ponytail, a vocabulary of passive jabs wrapped in a sugary tone, and a way of occupying a room like it, owed her something. From the beginning, she made her opinion of me known without ever saying it outright. The first time they visited after their honeymoon, she walked into the parlor and said, "Oh, so vintage. I love how you kept all this old stuff." Then she laughed like she'd said something harmless. I'd spent years curating that room, every lamp, every thread of tapestry placed with purpose. But I smiled. Of course I did. That's what women like me do. Lincoln chuckled and pulled her closer. That was the beginning. Now, dinners feel staged. They arrive once a month, always late. Brielle brings her own wine. Lincoln barely looks at me. We eat on the same table Daniel and I chose when Lincoln was 10. The one he scratched with a fork when I refused to let him quit piano. That scratch is still there. But now, instead of youthful rebellion, there's just polite indifference. Brielle often makes comments like, "You don't have to go all out, Eleanor." We're not guests. But I still set the table with silver. I still cook roast chicken with thyme and lemon, the way Daniel liked it, even though Lincoln now prefers takeout. I light the candles, fold the napkins, and pretend it's not for nothing. They laugh easily with each other, whisper inside jokes, leave early. And each time, after the door closes behind them, I sit in the stillness of this grand home and wonder when it stopped feeling like mine. The rooms echo more now. The parlor holds its breath. The upstairs hallway creaks not from footsteps, but from time pressing in on itself. I keep the guest room made, always. The towels folded, lavender tucked into the corners of the pillows. But they've never stayed overnight. Not once. I remember the way Lincoln used to burst through the door after baseball games, tracking mud on the floors, yelling for snacks. I used to complain, but I loved it. Loved knowing my presence mattered, that my care had a home to land in. I still bake his favorite pie, pecan with bourbon, but they never eat dessert. Brielle is off sugar, and Lincoln, well, he follows. Lately, I've been waking before dawn. I walk the hallways, stopping by doors that don't open anymore. I run my hands along walls covered in memories no one asks about. I water the ficus in the foyer even though it's dying, like so many other things here that once thrived. One morning, I overheard Brielle on the phone. She thought I'd left for the pharmacy. "She's just so extra," she laughed. "Like, who polishes silverware for Wednesday dinner?" Her voice danced with amusement, unaware, or unconcerned, that I was on the other side of the wall. It wasn't the insult that stung. It was the ease with which she said it, as though I were a caricature, a relic, something to be humored, not respected. Lincoln didn't correct her. He laughed too, a soft, tired laugh that said, "That's just how she is. Let it go." That night, I didn't sleep.
I stared at the ceiling, counting all the ways I've made this house a home, all the sacrifices, all the silences I swallowed. And I realized something had shifted, something deep and unforgiving.
For the first time in decades, I felt entirely alone, even in my own legacy. Family, they say, is everything. But what happens when the people closest to you make you feel like nothing? I'm not dramatic. I'm not extra. I'm a woman who gave her life to a house, a man, and a boy who no longer sees her. And for the first time, I am starting to wonder what it would feel like to stop giving. We were hosting again, Thursday night. Brielle had insisted we invite her friends. Two women in their 30s, all big sunglasses and curated giggles. Lincoln agreed without even looking at me. "It'll be fun, Mom. You always do too much anyway." I spent the day preparing. I ironed the linen napkins, plated goat cheese tarts with balsamic drizzle, lit the vanilla sage candles in the foyer. I knew they wouldn't notice the effort, but habit doesn't surrender easily, especially when it's all you have left to hold on to. By the time they arrived, 30 minutes late, with laughter already blooming between them, I was standing by the dining table, hands folded, rehearsing my small talk. The conversation was light at first. Brielle gushed about her skincare routine and her detox week while sipping wine. The guests smiled and nodded, occasionally eyeing the antique cutlery or whispering about the chandelier I'd imported from Florence. I tried to stay engaged, asking polite questions, offering seconds. Then, somewhere between salad and the main course, Brielle tilted her head, fork dangling from manicured fingers, and said with a laugh, "Eleanor, you are just so extra." It landed like a slap. The air didn't shift. No one gasped. They all laughed, quick shallow bursts like birds startled from a wire. Lincoln glanced at me, gave a crooked little chuckle, and said, "You know how Mom is." I froze, smile fixed like porcelain. My stomach curdled. So extra. Two words, light as feathers, brutal as knives. It wasn't what she said, it was how. Careless, pleased with herself, as if I were a character in her comedy set, as if my existence, my traditions, my effort, my love, was some kind of overperformance. I excused myself 10 minutes later, said I had a headache. Lincoln barely looked up. Brielle mumbled something about the wine being strong. I climbed the staircase slowly, counting each step like a prayer. In the bathroom, I stared into the mirror. The candlelight flickered across my face, softening the lines around my eyes. I reached for a tissue and wiped the red lipstick from my mouth. Slowly, methodically, as if erasing something louder than color. So extra. The phrase ricocheted through my skull. I'd heard other things over the years, jokes about being old school, jabs about being too formal. But this felt definitive. A label, a dismissal wrapped in glitter. I thought back to all the times I dulled my voice. At Daniel's side, smiling while he talked over me at dinner parties. At Lincoln's parent-teacher conferences, quietly absorbing criticisms, never pushing back. At every family event since Brielle's arrival, hosting without gratitude, nodding through slights. When did I become expendable? I wandered into the hallway, trailing my fingers along the wallpaper we'd chosen during a winter storm in '86. I remember Daniel saying it made the house feel warmer. Lincoln was 3, hiding under the table with crayons. We were a family, or at least, I thought we were. I poured myself a glass of water and sat on the edge of my bed. The voices from downstairs floated up, indistinct now, just noise, distant, like laughter from a party you were never invited to. I stayed in my room after they left, didn't go down to clean, didn't clear the wine glasses or stack the dishes. I sat in silence, listening to the house breathe. The next morning, the sun poured in like nothing had happened, but something had shifted. I didn't bother making my usual omelet, just toast, dry. I stood by the kitchen window watching the wind press against the glass. That's how I felt, pressed against something invisible, trying to hold my shape. Later that afternoon, I went to the study to fetch an old recipe. I kept my journals in there too, tucked in the cabinet behind the bookshelf. Daniel's files were still organized the way he left them, manila folders, handwritten labels. I hadn't touched most of them in years. I was reaching for the cranberry bread recipe when I knocked over a slim black binder. It thudded softly to the floor, pages fanning open. I crouched down, reached for it, paused. It wasn't mine. Inside were scanned documents, property valuation, mortgage estimates, realtor contacts. The address listed? Whitmore House, my house. At the bottom of one page in Brielle's cursive, could be market ready by spring. Link says she won't notice. He'll handle it. I couldn't breathe. I stared at the page, rereading the sentence until the words blurred. Market ready. She won't notice. I sat there for minutes, maybe hours. Time melted into something slow and sticky. They weren't just cruel. They were planning to erase me. That night, I didn't sleep again. I wandered through the house barefoot, fingers brushing memories like cobwebs. I stood in the kitchen where Daniel had kissed my forehead every morning, in the foyer where Lincoln took his prom photos, in the parlor where Brielle once said, "Ah, this place could be in a museum." They wanted to sell it. They wanted me gone. And Lincoln, my son, had no qualms. For the first time, I stopped asking what I'd done wrong. I started asking what they'd done that made them believe they had the right. I wasn't born this way, prim, quiet, practiced in the art of disappearing without leaving the room. I was shaped into it, molded by a mother who thought softness was a flaw and silence was the highest form of grace. My earliest memory is of my mother tying a bow at the back of my dress so tightly I couldn't breathe. "Beauty takes discipline, Eleanor," she said, her mouth a firm line as she pulled the ribbon hard enough to make my spine ache. I was 6. Our house was immaculate. We weren't allowed to slam doors or raise voices. We greeted guests with poised smiles and hands folded over our laps. I was never praised, only told when I had fallen short. Don't pout, sit up straight, control your emotions. Feelings were shameful. Tears were weakness. My father died when I was 14, a heart attack. He was the only quiet presence in our home who ever looked at me like I was enough. The day we buried him, I stood by the casket holding his photo. My mother tugged my sleeve and whispered, "Stop crying, Eleanor, it's not dignified." At the funeral luncheon, I served coffee to people who barely remembered his name. That was the blueprint. So when I met Daniel at 19, tall, magnetic, full of ambition and opinions, I fell hard. He made decisions with confidence, spoke with certainty, never second-guessed himself. I mistook his decisiveness for safety, a man who knew what he wanted. And in those early years, what he wanted was me. He proposed under a gazebo at the edge of a lake. I was 22. My mother approved. "He's strong. You won't have to think too much around him. Just follow." And I did. We moved into a small cottage first. He worked late. I ironed shirts, cooked dinners, waited up with tea. When I mentioned feeling lonely, he said, "You're too sensitive. I'm building a future for us." I nodded, swallowed the ache, added an extra spoon of sugar to his cup. Years passed. We built this house together. Or rather, he hired the men, and I chose the wallpaper. People loved us. Daniel and Eleanor Whitmore. Respectable, elegant. We hosted charity events, attended galas. I smiled at the right times. I never corrected him, even when he told stories that weren't true. Even when he made choices without asking. When I once told him I wanted to take a painting class, he laughed and said, "You'll never finish it. You get overwhelmed too easily." And just like that, the idea folded into itself. I didn't bring it up again. Silence became my currency. The more I gave, the more I was praised. When Lincoln was born, I thought things would change. I thought I could raise him differently. I used to sing to him at night, whisper stories in the dark, soft, hopeful things. But Daniel was strict. "Boys need structure," he'd say, taking the toy out of Lincoln's hand when he cried. "Don't coddle him, El. He needs to be a man." So I retreated. When Lincoln threw tantrums, I apologized to Daniel instead of asking what Lincoln was feeling. When he lied, I punished him but never asked why. I taught him to be polite, to say thank you, to never talk back. But I didn't teach him how to be kind, because I didn't know how to ask for kindness myself. Lincoln grew into a boy who knew how to charm a room, but not how to care for one. When he forgot my birthday at 16, Daniel shrugged. "Don't take it personally, teenagers are selfish." I told myself it wasn't a big deal. When he got older and brushed past my affection, I reasoned, at least he still calls. I look back now, and I see the thread. From my mother's coldness to Daniel's disregard to Lincoln's indifference. A lineage of women smiling through their bruises, teaching their sons to mistake dominance for confidence. I enabled it. I passed it down. In one memory, Daniel is sitting in the study reading the paper. I'm standing in the doorway, wringing my hands. "I'd like to visit my sister next week," I say. "She's having surgery." He doesn't look up. "You're needed here." I wait. "Is that all?" he asks without glancing up. I nodded, backed out, drove my sister a card instead. I thought love was sacrifice, that being easy to live with meant being loved. But now I see. I raised a son who learned love was convenience, that women fold and the world applauds them for it. I sit in the quiet of my study now, staring at old photographs, smiling faces posed perfectly. Daniel in a tuxedo, Lincoln in a Little League uniform, me, always poised, always watching. I used to think my silence was noble. Now I think it was contagious. It didn't happen all at once. No, it was a slow unraveling, like the hem of a dress that you don't notice fraying until you trip over it. At first, Brielle's help seemed harmless. She offered to manage the grocery orders online, saying it would save me time. She suggested replacing the front gate's iron latch, calling it a bit too colonial. Then it was the pantry. She reorganized everything while I was at a dental appointment. Moved the spices, labeled the shelves, tossed the preserves I'd canned myself last fall. "Just streamlining," she chirped, not noticing the silence that wrapped around me like fog. Then it was the guest list. A spring luncheon I'd always hosted for the Historical Society, my one standing tradition. Without asking, Brielle emailed everyone a revised invite, with a modern theme and digital RSVP. I learned about it through a neighbor who said, "Brielle's really modernizing things, isn't she?" Lincoln barely visited. Birthdays came and went with late texts, no calls. Holidays were a performance. Him arriving in a crisp shirt, hugging me like I was a colleague. Brielle snapping pictures for her social media captioned, "Family time, sorta." At Christmas, I served the ham. Brielle asked if I'd remembered the gluten-free rolls for a friend she'd brought without telling me. When I said no, she sighed. "That's okay. I'll fix it. It's a lot for someone your age." My age. As if I'd somehow aged out of mattering in my own home. Lincoln said nothing. After that, I stopped sitting at the head of the table. No one noticed. They started staying longer, leaving messes I wasn't invited to clean, but was expected to resolve. Brielle began making offhand comments. "We should put a wine fridge here," or "This room could totally be a home office if we move the furniture." We. The first time I confronted Lincoln about it, tentatively, carefully, he said, "She's just trying to help, Mom. You get overwhelmed with details." Overwhelmed. The same word Daniel used, the same word that took a blade to my confidence, one small slice at a time. By spring, I felt like a housekeeper with a family name. I cooked, I cleaned, I nodded, I stayed invisible. Until Callie arrived. She was a nurse from the home care agency, originally sent after I'd slipped in the garden and bruised my hip. Tall, with soft eyes and a laugh that felt like spring thaw. At first, she came twice a week, helped with stretches, checked vitals, asked how I was sleeping. But soon, her visits became more than clinical. She'd stay a little longer. Bring me coffee with cinnamon, ask about the house's history. Listen. Once she asked about the wallpaper in the dining room, and I found myself telling her about the day Daniel and I picked it. How he hated florals, but let me choose anyway. She listened like it mattered, like I mattered. She never rushed, never corrected me. When Brielle popped in during a visit and asked, "Do you really need to come this often?" Callie just smiled and said, "I like to." After that, she began showing up on her days off. "Just checking in," she'd say, but she always brought something. Flowers from the market, muffins she baked, a book she thought I'd like. She never acted like I owed her answers, just space. One morning, while I was trimming roses outside, Callie brought me a cardigan I'd left inside. She paused at the porch, holding a black leather case. "This was on the hallway bench. I didn't want anyone to trip." It was Lincoln's. He must have left it behind during their last drop-in. I opened it absently, intending to set it aside, and then I saw the papers, stacked neatly. No envelopes, no secrecy, because they didn't think I'd ever look. Title transfer forms, my name typed in the current owner field. Lincoln's name listed as the recipient. In Brielle's handwriting at the top corner. Push signature by end of month. Realtor says June is ideal. I stared at it, not just at the betrayal, but at the certainty, the assumption, the confidence that I would simply comply. Callie saw my face change. Are you all right? I handed her the paper. My fingers shook. She read it, slowly, carefully, then looked up and said, Did you know about this? I shook my head. She placed a hand on my shoulder, not out of pity, but steadiness. You should talk to someone about this. I wanted to scream, to cry, to tear down the drapes and throw their monogrammed mugs out the window. But I didn't. I folded the papers neatly, returned them to the case, and carried it to my study. I sat in Daniel's old chair, the one Lincoln used to curl up in as a child. I looked out the window and felt the burn of humiliation crawl up my throat. They were planning to take everything, with a smile, with polite thank yous and glossy social media posts, with hugs that meant nothing. And the worst part? I'd taught them how. I looked at Callie then. She didn't fill the silence with advice or sympathy. She just sat beside me, letting the moment land. I don't think they realize who they're dealing with, she said quietly. Neither did I. Not until that day. The house was quiet that evening, too quiet, the kind of silence that wraps around your ribcage and refuses to let go. I sat at the edge of my bed, the black briefcase resting like a bomb on the comforter. I'd returned it to its spot, unopened since that morning, but I couldn't stop thinking about what lay inside. Those neat little pages, those presumptions, those signatures not yet forged but already faded. My thoughts were loud. They argued with each other. Mothers don't disown their children. Blood is everything. He's still your son. You raised him. But underneath that was another voice, one I hadn't let speak in decades. It was quieter but firmer. And what has he done with your love? I stood up, knees stiff, heart heavier than ever, and made my way to the study. The floor creaked beneath me as if the house itself was protesting. In the corner cabinet, beneath a lockbox, behind layers of manila folders and deed copies, lay the envelope. My estate file, cream-colored, stiff, marked EW private. I hadn't looked at it since Daniel's funeral. After he passed, I updated it once to add Lincoln's name as sole inheritor. It had felt simple at the time. Natural. There was no one else. Who else would I trust? But now, with my hands trembling as I opened the flap, nothing felt natural. The papers slid out, their edges crisp and indifferent. I laid them across the desk. There it was, in my handwriting. All real estate holdings, including Whitmore House, to be passed to Lincoln Whitmore upon my death. I stared at it. So final, so absolute, so unchallenged. I reached for a pen, not the nice one in the drawer, just a black ballpoint sitting in a mug by the lamp. My fingers hovered. And then I started to cross it out. Line by line, his name vanished. My hand shook. Not from anger, but from the weight of what it meant. This wasn't just a legal revision. It was an undoing, a severing, a declaration that the boy I raised had become a man I no longer recognized and could no longer trust. I dropped the pen halfway through. My breath caught in my throat. What kind of mother does this? What kind of woman signs away her child? My mind reached backward, as if it needed to prove to itself that this wasn't impulsive, that this wasn't revenge. I opened my journal. Page after page, I reread the quiet moments I'd once glossed over, each a tiny bruise. Age 15, Lincoln muttering under his breath when I asked him to clean his room. You're not my boss. 17, coming home drunk after prom, reeking of beer, slamming doors. I stayed up waiting. He never apologized. 22, engaged to Brielle. He called to tell me, not ask. It's not about you, Mom. 25, skipping our Thanksgiving dinner because they wanted to travel. It's just one holiday, don't be dramatic. There were so many more. And each time I told myself, he's young, he'll grow, I'm his mother, this is love. But Callie had said something the day she found those papers, something I hadn't let settle until now. You taught him to be kind. He chose not to be. I didn't fail. I didn't fall short. He turned away. I looked up then, the room dim around me. My eyes landed on the photo across the desk. Me holding baby Lincoln, swaddled and red-faced, staring at him like he was the sun. That love was real. But love, I'm learning, does not justify betrayal. Later, Callie stopped by. She knew better than to ask why I'd called. She sat across from me while I poured us tea, my movements slow and mechanical. "I'm changing the will," I said softly. She blinked. "Are you sure?" I nodded, eyes on my teacup. "I feel like I've been asleep all these years. I kept thinking if I gave enough, stayed small enough, they'd see me. They'd care. And now?" she asked gently. "I see that I was never invisible. I was just convenient. And now that I'm not useful the way they want, I'm disposable." She leaned forward. "You're not disposable, Eleanor. You're reclaiming yourself." I looked at her then, really looked. This woman, a stranger by technicality, but the only person who'd looked at me in months with actual regard. She wasn't blood. She wasn't family. But she saw me. I reached into the desk drawer and pulled out a blank legal form. "I'd like to make some changes," I said, more to myself than to her. And this time, I didn't tremble. I didn't tell anyone, not even Callie, when I made the call. The lawyer, Mr. Reeve, had handled our affairs for over 30 years. He was the one who helped Daniel draft our first will, back when Lincoln was just 6, still carrying a stuffed bear to bed. He recognized my voice instantly, though he paused, slightly puzzled, when I asked for a private appointment. We met in his office 2 days later. A quiet room lined with oak bookshelves and leather-bound tomes that smelled like certainty. He greeted me with gentle eyes and a respectful handshake. "I need to make a change to my estate," I said, sliding over the manila folder I had prepared the night before. He looked down at the papers, flipping through them slowly, stopping at the line where Lincoln's name had once been. "You're sure?" he asked. "Yes." My voice didn't falter. "And this, Callie Wallace? That's who you'd like to name as sole beneficiary?" I nodded. "She's shown me more kindness in 1 year than my son has in the last 10. There was no bitterness in my voice. Just truth. Clean, unflinching truth. I signed the papers that afternoon. With a smooth stroke of the pen, I rewrote my future. The house, the savings, the artwork, even the jewelry I once imagined Lincoln's wife would inherit. All of it, now entrusted to someone who had loved without expectation. Compassion beyond obligation. That's what I wrote in the statement of intent. Mr. Reeve looked at me for a long moment before sealing the file. "People don't usually do this," he said gently. "I'm not people," I replied. "I'm a woman who finally understands that being a mother doesn't mean being a martyr." That night, I returned home and stood in the foyer for a long time. The house felt different, lighter somehow. Like it had been holding its breath, waiting for me to catch up with my own worth. I called Callie the next morning. "Come over, bring paint clothes." She arrived an hour later in worn jeans and a bandana tied around her head. I handed her a brush. She didn't ask questions. The dining room was the first room Daniel and I decorated after moving in. Dark, masculine tones, burgundy walls, heavy drapes. It had always felt like his space, not mine. Lincoln had celebrated every childhood birthday there. Each year another layer of performance. The perfect mother hosting the perfect party for a boy who barely said thank you. But now, it would be mine. We chose a soft dove gray, something calm but alive. As we worked, we talked about books, childhood, places we wanted to see. We laughed more than I expected. At one point, I dipped my brush into the wrong can and splattered her sleeve. She gasped dramatically, and for the first time in years, I laughed, full, deep from the belly. When we finished the first coat, we stepped back and admired the change. It wasn't just new paint, it was reclamation. "This room feels different already," she said. "So do I answered. For the next week, I rearranged furniture, donated old linens, boxed up heirlooms I no longer felt tethered to. I stopped cooking things Lincoln liked. I started making things I enjoyed: spicy soups, fresh bread, dark chocolate custard. I started calling myself Eleanor again, not just Mom. Then on a stormy Thursday afternoon, the phone rang. It was Lincoln. I hadn't heard his voice in weeks, and even then it had been clipped, obligatory. "Hey, Mom." I knew something was wrong before he said another word. His tone was brittle, hollow. I need to talk to you." I didn't respond right away. He went on. "It's work. They're accusing me of, there was a mix-up, some finance reporting thing. I got fired. I didn't do anything, but they're saying I have to pay something back and we weren't prepared. The apartment. Brielle's freaking out." Still, I said nothing. I know things have been off, but I could really use your help right now. Just a little bit. To get us through. His voice cracked then. The first crack I'd heard in years. For a brief, flickering moment, old instincts stirred, those well-worn maternal reflexes to rescue, to soften, to absorb pain. But they passed. No, I said, clearly, softly. He was silent. I'm not your emergency plan, Lincoln, I continued. You've made it very clear that I'm not part of your life. You chose that. Now you have to live with it. His silence thickened. Then, you'd let me sink? Your own son? I didn't let you sink. You chose to swim away. He hung up. I sat back in my chair, the receiver still warm in my hand. My heart didn't race. I didn't cry. Instead, I turned to look at the freshly painted dining room. The light danced differently off the walls now, brighter, freer. For the first time in my life, I'd said no without apology. I'd chosen peace over obligation, and it felt like freedom. It didn't take long. Less than a week after I signed the papers, the knock came, sharp, impatient, entitled. I'd been expecting it. That kind of fury doesn't stay dormant for long once its inheritance is denied. I opened the door to find Lincoln standing stiffly on the porch, jaw tight, hands clenched. Brielle stood just behind him, arms folded, sunglasses pushed up like a crown. Her lips were already curled in accusation. You changed the will? Lincoln's voice was low but taut, like a wire about to snap. I didn't answer right away. I stepped aside, letting them in without a word. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of a scene on the doorstep. They marched into the parlor as if they still owned it. I stayed by the window, back straight, hands loose at my sides. I noticed the irony. It was the first time they truly looked at me since Christmas. You gave everything to the nurse? Brielle spat the word like it tasted spoiled. To some random caretaker who bakes muffins and plays therapist? She's not random, I said evenly. She's been more present, more compassionate, and more honest with me than either of you. Lincoln blinked, like he hadn't expected me to speak. You seriously think this is okay? After everything I've done for you? For me? My voice cracked open with disbelief. What exactly have you done for me, Lincoln? He scoffed. You raised me. That means you don't just get to cut me off because you feel neglected. That's not how family works. Isn't it? I asked quietly. Brielle stepped forward. This is elder abuse. You're not in your right mind. We can go to court. We will go to court. Her threats hit the air like cold water, but I didn't shiver. Gaslighting, guilt, legal intimidation, they had come armed with all of it. You've clearly been manipulated, Brielle continued, pacing now. That woman, she's been inserting herself into your life. It's gross, Eleanor. She's after your money. Everyone will see that. My mouth opened slightly, then closed. In my head, voices began to rise. My mother. You'll regret being so emotional. No man respects a woman who cries. Daniel. You're always making problems that don't exist. Brielle. You're just so extra. A cacophony of dismissal, of silencing, of being reduced again and again to a woman who must be wrong simply because she feels. But I didn't flinch. Stop talking about her like she's not in the room. Callie's voice rang from behind me. She had stepped into the parlor quietly, unseen. She moved beside me now, calm but fierce. Lincoln turned toward her. This doesn't concern you. It does, she said, because I've watched her be ignored and manipulated for months, because I've listened while she tried to justify your cruelty, and because she finally made a choice for herself. That scares you. You don't know anything about us, Brielle snapped. I know enough, Callie replied. Lincoln stepped forward, his voice rising. You raised me to be respectful, to be successful. Now you're punishing me for it? I stared at him, really stared. I raised you to be decent, I said, voice steady. But I also raised you to believe I'd never say no. That was my mistake. The silence that followed was thick and brittle. They had expected a fight, or tears, or maybe even a retraction. They didn't know what to do with resolve. We'll see you in court, Brielle hissed as they turned to leave. No, I said, and they paused. You'll see me in peace. And they did. The silence came swiftly. Lincoln didn't call, didn't write, not even a terse email. Nothing. It wasn't surprising, but it still stung. I suppose I'd hoped that beneath the fury there might be a reflection, a question, a pause, some sliver of recognition that I hadn't made this decision out of cruelty, but necessity. Instead, there was Brielle. Within days, her social media lit up like a flashing neon sign, cryptic captions beneath polished photos. When people you love become strangers, you learn to breathe again. And later, not all abuse leaves bruises. The town whispered. I could feel it. At the market, in the pews at church during book club meetings, kind glances laced with curiosity, conversations that quieted as I entered, invitations that dwindled without reason. Once a neighbor lingered at my mailbox a little too long, feigning interest in a cracked stone. You must be so lonely in that big house, she said, not unkindly, but with that thin layer of judgment women coat their concern with. I smiled. Loneliness has a different texture when you choose it. Still, the doubt crept in. At night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, asking myself questions that had no neat answers. Was I cruel? Was I selfish? Did I give up too soon? But each morning, I woke with a steadier hand. The ache didn't go away, but it stopped controlling the rhythm of my breath. I kept busy. I joined a community garden, started journaling again, rearranged the sitting room to face the morning light, and every few days Callie came by, not as my nurse, but as my friend. One afternoon, as we sipped tea in the newly sunlit room, she asked, "Do you feel guilty?" I didn't answer right away. I stirred honey into my cup, watching the swirl dissolve. "Every day," I said finally, "but it's no longer stronger than what I feel when I see my own reflection." She nodded, not pressing further. I looked at her then, seeing not just the kindness in her features, but the quiet understanding that comes only from people who've lived their own reckonings. We didn't need to fill every silence anymore. That in itself was a gift. Later that week, I decided to clean the attic. The dust was thick, the air stale. I hadn't been up there in years. Boxes lined the walls like ghosts waiting to be noticed. One of them was Daniel's. His name was printed in thick black marker across the top flap. Inside were papers, old work documents, tax returns, and handwritten notes folded neatly into envelopes. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. And then I found it. A letter. No envelope, just a single sheet folded into thirds, addressed in Daniel's handwriting. For Eleanor. The ink was faint, but unmistakably his. I sat down on the floor, legs crossed like a child, and opened it. "Eleanor, if you're reading this, it means I'm not here to say it aloud. And for that, I'm sorry. I should have said it years ago. I should have said it when Lincoln was 10 and I caught the way he rolled his eyes at you, or when he was 16 and you sat at the table alone on your birthday. I should have said it when I told you to ignore how he spoke to you, how he made you feel like a shadow in your own home. I thought I was protecting him, teaching him to be strong, but I realize now I was protecting my own comfort. I watched you shrink, and I let it happen because it was easier than confronting what we were raising. I saw you, Elle. I always did. And I'm sorry I didn't help you stand taller. You deserved more from me. From all of us. I hope wherever this finds you, you finally learn to take up space. Daniel." I didn't cry right away. I folded the letter back slowly, like it was sacred. I placed it in my lap and sat still for what felt like hours. All this time I had blamed myself, for being weak, for being blind, for not protecting Lincoln from becoming what he became. But Daniel had seen it too. He'd seen me. And for the first time in years, I felt less alone in my own story. Later, I framed the letter and hung it in the hallway. Not as a pardon, but as a reminder that love and silence are not the same thing. That seeing someone truly seeing them means standing beside them, even when it's hard. I started wearing lipstick again. Not the muted pinks I used to swipe on out of habit, but bold shades. Cinnamon reds, sunset coral, deep rose. Colors that said something, even if I didn't. It began with a scarf. Callie brought it one morning, silk, vibrant with splashes of mustard, teal, and violet. "It reminded me of you," she said. I laughed. "I'm not this bright." "You were never dull," she replied. I wore it the next day to the library fundraiser, tied around my neck in a loose knot. A woman I barely knew complimented me. "It makes your eyes pop," she said. I'd forgotten people noticed eyes once they stopped crying. In the weeks that followed, I began attending events again. Small things at first. A poetry reading at the Civic Center, a botanical workshop at the park. I didn't say much, I didn't need to. Just being in rooms where no one knew my story felt like air. At one luncheon, someone asked, "And you are?" I paused. "I'm Eleanor," I said. "Not Mrs. Whitmore, not Lincoln's mother, not Daniel's widow, just Eleanor." The words felt strange in my mouth at first, unfurnished, unadorned. But honest, it wasn't a reinvention, it was a return. Callie noticed it too. She'd stop by with travel brochures, sketches, paint kits. "When's the last time you went somewhere just for yourself?" she asked one afternoon. I hesitated. "I used to dream of Paris." "Then dream bigger." I didn't book the ticket, not yet, but I started painting. On weekends, I'd set up by the sunroom window with watercolors and cheap paper. My first attempts were awkward, childish, blotchy landscapes, tilted vases, but it wasn't about perfection. It was about presence. I painted my roses, the chipped teacup from my grandmother, the ocean, as I remembered it from a childhood trip when my father held my hand and told me not to be afraid of waves. Each stroke was a declaration. I'm still here. One morning I opened all the windows in the house, every single one. Let the breeze rush in like laughter. The curtains danced. The air carried away the scent of closed spaces, of secrets, of old dust and older grief. Neighbors began to wave again, tentatively at first. A few even stopped to chat. They didn't ask about Lincoln. They asked about the flowers in my yard, or what I was reading, or whether I'd tried the new cafe in town. I found myself laughing with strangers. Not polite hostess laughter, but belly-deep chuckles that crinkled my eyes and made me lean on the counter. At the local women's center, I gave a talk, an impromptu one. I'd gone just to listen, but someone had canceled last minute, and the director asked if I'd be willing to fill in. What would I even say? I asked Callie, who had come with me. Say what no one else has the courage to. So I did. I stood before 20 women, some young, some with graying hair like mine, and I spoke of loss, of silence, of finding yourself after the roles dissolve. I spoke of motherhood, not as destiny, but as one chapter, of love, not as debt, but as a gift freely given and taken away. When I finished, no one clapped right away. They sat in stillness, tears catching at the corners of their eyes. Then one woman stood and said, "I thought I was the only one." That night, I looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. The lines were deeper, yes. My eyes weren't as sharp. My hands had begun to tremble sometimes, but I saw a woman who had weathered more than storms. I saw Eleanor. Not perfect, not broken, just whole. The knock was slower this time. Not urgent, not angry, but no less heavy. I knew it was him. I opened the door and found Lincoln standing alone. No brile, no pretense, just him, looking thinner, a little worn, his eyes shadowed by something that looked too much like resentment to be mistaken for grief. "Can we talk?" he asked. I stepped back, silent, letting him in for what I knew would be the last time. He walked into the sitting room, glanced around like a stranger visiting a place he once called home. His eyes landed on the freshly painted dining room walls, then on the framed photo of me and Callie beside the fireplace. "That's new," he muttered. I didn't respond. He turned to face me, arms crossed. "So this is it? You're really doing this? Cutting me out? Giving everything to a nurse you've known for what, a year?" I watched his mouth form the words "a nurse" like it was an insult. Like care could be measured in time instead of tenderness. "She's more than that," I said calmly. He shook his head. "You chose a stranger over your own blood." The words landed with the force he intended, but they didn't crack me. "No," I said. "I chose someone who saw me, who respected me, who never once made me feel like a burden." His nostrils flared. "You raised me. You gave me everything. And now you act like I'm some villain?" I walked over to the armchair and sat down slowly, folding my hands in my lap. "I'm not acting, I'm remembering." He narrowed his eyes. "I remember all the times I asked for your time and you gave me excuses, all the dinners you skipped, the holidays you left early, the phone calls you let go unanswered. I remember your silence when Brielle insulted me at my own table. I remember wiping lipstick off in the mirror, trying not to cry. I remember begging for scraps of your attention and being told I was too emotional." He opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. "You don't get to rewrite this, Lincoln. You were there, you just didn't care." He stepped back, stunned by my tone. I'd never spoken to him this way, not even when he was a child. You think I'm the one who abandoned you, I said, voice steady. But the truth is, you left me years ago. You just kept showing up out of obligation, and even that was conditional. He said nothing. I spent my entire adult life trying to be the woman everyone expected, first for my mother, then for your father, and finally for you. I gave and gave, hoping that maybe one day I'd be enough for you to see me. I stood now, meeting him eye to eye, and I finally realized I was enough all along, just not to the people I was breaking myself for. He stared at the floor, jaw tight. You sound like a stranger. No, I said gently. I sound like someone who stopped apologizing. He paced for a moment, trying to summon a counter-argument. Something clever, something cutting, but I'd taken that power from him. I hope you heal, I said, my voice softening. Truly, I hope you find whatever it is you think you're owed. I moved toward the door, holding it open. But I won't be your foundation anymore. Build your own house. He didn't argue. He just left. I stood there for a long while after the door clicked shut, the breeze curling through the open hallway behind me. Later that week, Callie arrived with a manila envelope in her hand, her expression unreadable. This came to the clinic, she said, from a law firm. She handed it to me, brows raised. I nodded. Open it. Inside was a letter, official, typed, bearing the seal of my lawyer. Callie read silently, eyes widening. It was a deed, a statement of transfer, a formal document establishing the Eleanor Whitmore Foundation for Compassionate Care, named in Callie's honor. You set up a foundation? She asked, stunned. For caregivers, I said. For women who go unseen, who give everything and are left with nothing. Tears welled in her eyes. I wanted my story to end with something more than loss, I added. I wanted it to begin again, with legacy. She hugged me fiercely. Not as a nurse, not as an employee, but as family. And for the first time, I felt the ground beneath me hold steady. Not because I'd earned it or inherited it, but because I'd built it. Myself. The house is quieter now, but not the suffocating kind. Not the silence that clings like guilt or echoes like an apology left unsaid. This is the kind of quiet that breathes, that welcomes, that waits for no one and still feels full. I walk barefoot through the hallway, sunlight warming the old hardwood beneath my steps. The walls no longer whisper someone else's expectations. They simply stand, steady, simple, mine. In the parlor, I pause. The armchair near the fireplace still holds its curve from years of sitting, but the tension that once lived in this room has dissolved. Gone is the heavy air of obligation, of stifled dinners and filtered words. Now, the room holds music, classical in the mornings, jazz in the evenings, sometimes silence when I'm reading or painting. Sometimes Callie's laugh, when she visits and tells me about the newest nurse at the clinic who keeps burning toast. I continue through the dining room, once dark and grave, now bathed in soft gray and amber light. The table no longer hosts forced civility. It has become a place for new stories. Neighbor luncheons, painting supplies laid out in disorder, the occasional solo dinner with a glass of wine and no pretense. In the kitchen, I pass the counter where I once stood frozen, clutching a letter that changed everything. Now it holds a notebook, a jar of ink pens, and a mug with the words, "Still here, still standing." It was Callie who gave it to me. I step into what used to be Daniel's study. The air is lighter now, the furniture rearranged. The framed letter he wrote to me, the one I found in the attic, sits on the desk. Sometimes I read it again, not out of grief, but out of gratitude. His admission gave me permission to stop blaming myself. The bookshelves hold new titles now. Memoirs by women I admire, art books, novels with heroines who don't shrink themselves for someone else's comfort. On the opposite wall hangs a corkboard, pinned with pages from a manuscript I've been piecing together. Chapter by chapter, memory by memory. My memoir. I've titled it, "Don't Be So Emotional," the last thing my mother ever said to me. I used to hate that phrase. It felt like a muzzle, a dismissal, a condemnation of everything that made me feel alive. But now, I wear it like armor, like truth. Emotion is not weakness, it's a compass. In the sunroom, I pause again. My paints sit in the corner, water glass half full, the canvas mid-stroke, an abstract swirl of violet, gold, and indigo. There's no plan, no message, just movement, just color. I sit on the window bench, pull the memoir draft onto my lap, and reread the last paragraph I wrote. I spent most of my life trying to be a perfect version of a woman I didn't even like. Now, I'm trying to be honest. Honest with myself, with my past, and with the younger version of me who still watches from the corner of every room, waiting to be told she's enough. I close the notebook gently, my fingers lingering on the cover. In that moment, I feel her, my younger self, standing just at the edge of the room. She isn't crying. She isn't afraid. She's nodding. I rise, walk to the windows, and push them open wide. The air that rushes in smells like garden soil, like sea salt, like something reborn. The curtains lift. The light pours in. Birds call from the tree just outside the porch, their voices clear and insistent. And for the first time in a long, long while, I don't brace for what's next. I welcome it. A full year has passed. The house hums with a different energy now, not quieter, not louder, just fuller. There's life in every room. Music from the kitchen radio in the mornings, laughter echoing down the hallway, footsteps that don't feel like trespass, but presence. The Eleanor Foundation for Compassionate Care has grown beyond anything I imagined. What started as a quiet gesture, a way to honor Callie and every woman who loved in the margins, has become a lifeline for others. We've funded dozens of training scholarships, opened a local resource center, and recently launched a mentorship program for caregivers navigating burnout and neglect. The house serves as our central hub. We hold meetings in the sunroom, workshops in the dining room, and sometimes on breezy afternoons we move everything outside. Picnic tables, easels, open journals catching the wind. No one here calls me Mrs. Whitmore anymore. I'm just Eleanor, and not the Eleanor I once introduced with a smile and a softened voice. This Eleanor wears patterned scarves and tells her truth in full sentences. She knows how to say no without apology, and yes without guilt. She's not afraid to take up space, to be emotional, to be seen. The community has changed too, slowly, subtly. Women I once only waved to from across grocery aisles now stop me to talk about their daughters, their mothers, their own difficult choices. They ask for advice, or offer gratitude, or simply say, "I heard what you did. I wish I'd done the same." I don't offer judgment, only space. One morning, we hosted a small training session for a new group of caregivers. Callie, now the foundation's director, introduced each one, her voice confident, proud. She stood taller these days, not from vanity, but from purpose. I was walking through the hallway after refilling the coffee tray when a young woman, no more than 22, approached me. Nervous, sweet, with hands that wrung the hem of her cardigan. "Miss Eleanor," she said softly, "can I ask you something personal?" I nodded. She hesitated. "Did it hurt, letting go of your son?" I looked at her for a long moment. Then I smiled. Not as much as it hurt trying to hold on. She nodded, lips trembling just slightly. I reached out, touched her hand. That was enough. That evening, after everyone had gone, Callie stayed behind to help me clean up. We moved through the house with ease, like women who knew how to share silence. In the foyer, just above the console table, hung a photo in a simple wooden frame. It was one Callie and I had taken at last year's foundation launch, standing side by side in the front yard, sun in our eyes, arms linked. I had carved the word family into the wooden plaque beneath it one quiet afternoon. She noticed me looking at it. "You still okay with that word?" she asked gently. "Yes," I said, "because I finally understand it's not about blood. It's about belonging and respect and love that doesn't have to be earned with silence." She nodded. I walked to the windows and pushed them open. The sky was a soft lavender, the air sweet with blooming jasmine. Somewhere, a cardinal was singing, and I thought, this isn't a house anymore. It's a home again, not because of who lives in it or who left it, but because of what it now holds: truth, peace, and a woman who chose herself and never looked back. Ever loved someone so much you forgot yourself in the process? If Eleanor's story stirred something in you, you're not alone, and you're not powerless. Keep walking with us through stories that break, rebuild, and redefine what family really means. Because sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is choose you. Subscribe to never miss the next story that just might help you reclaim your own.